These verses tell us some of the details about the captivity, including the causes. So if you really want to get deep into it, but we know what the causes were. You know, what were they doing? Exactly what we're doing. We don't need God. We got it all. Who's God?
I did it myself.
Yeah, we did. You know, we built up all this wealth, and look at us. We don't need God. And then what happens? We let all these other gods in. And we start to follow those other gods. And we start to let go of what is true and good and moral, and we start to follow all these other things. Of course, we worship hedonism in this country. We worship humanism. We worship anything that says, I'm God. All you got to do is turn on Oprah Winfrey and you'll figure that out. Because what is she doing? She's, hey, you're God. You create your own universe. You can be anything you want to be, and you can get to heaven any way you want to go. Because you're already God. There's no wrong way. Anybody can get there. So we're doing the same thing. And when God's people refuse to hear His prophets, when we refuse to listen to the pastors that teach the Word of God, when we no longer pay any attention, when we don't go to church, when we don't read His Word, guess what? It's easy to get deceived. It doesn't take much because we don't know it. How do you live by the Word of God when you don't even know what the Word of God is? Get out a sheet of paper, write down the 10 Commandments all in order. How many of us will get those right? 100% of us, right? But see, we got the basis of the law, the 10 Commandments, and you go on the street corner, you go to any church, and I guarantee you 98 to 99% of the people in that church will not even get close to naming all 10 of them. Much less get them in order. But what is going on? If we don't understand His Word and we're not in His Word, then we are susceptible to all these little tricks that the devil's playing. And the thing we have to remember is that when we live in sin, when our nation is the #1 exporter of pornography, when child pornography is becoming the #1 form of pornography in this country, guess what? Sin has consequences. When we abort almost 50 million babies, sin has consequences. You know, so all these things, God always settles His accounts with those who refuse to heed His warnings. So one example of this in the nation's willful sin that continued over many years is stealing, and this is, again, the sabbatical years. The law, you know, Leviticus. How many of you have read Leviticus on a regular basis? Okay. Leviticus is one of those chapters we don't read that book because it tells us everything how we're supposed to do. You know, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do this. Well, guess what? God was serious about that. Jesus said, I didn't come to do away with the law. He came to what?
Fulfill it.
Oh, well, how does that work? You know, because so many, what we call the New Testament churches said, well, since Jesus, we don't have to pay any attention to the Old Testament. We can just discard that. It's all about Jesus. But that's not what He said. He said what? I didn't come to, you know, discard that. I came to fulfill it. How many times does He quote Deuteronomy? Alright, so He used them. But somehow we don't think we need to. But alright, so they were stealing, it says, stealing God's sabbatic laws. The law of the Lamb, Leviticus 25. The warning as to what would happen can be found in 26 in that chapter. The people disregarded the law. The Lord set out, and they went about their own agriculture. They decided they knew no more about agriculture than God. Okay? So they had their own little system. You know, God had a system. He said, you do this for 6 years, and then on the 7th year you do this, and then you do this. He had a precise way of growing crops and harvesting crops and how they were to be used and how much you left alone and He had it all down. And if you trusted, then He produced enough food in those 6 years that you had plenty to last the sabbatic year. Oh, but that required trust, didn't it? Well, they didn't want to have anything to do with that, so what do? They disregard the Word of God, and He said, again, you keep my covenant, keep my commands, abide by my laws, follow my principles. And if you do, there's blessing. But if you decide that you know more than I do, and you follow these things, and guess what? There is a consequence to that. When we do not follow God's natural laws, if we go to the top of the Empire State Building and jump off, what will happen? I don't care if you don't believe it. I don't care if you think you can fly. You're going to die. Boom! You're going. That's God's natural law. So when we go against His natural laws, we have certain consequences. So this is what's going on with Judah. Judah sinned against the law of the land, continued for 490 years. God is patient, isn't He? Be not deceived. God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that so he also reaps. Galatians 6:7. Boy, I like that one, don't you? So, well, farmers, I mean, isn't that how farmers operate? They don't not sow and then expect a crop. They sow and then they have an expectation of reaping what? What?
The crop.
Yeah, okay. That's God's natural law. So you feel bad about it. If you don't sow, you don't get no crop. If you sow, you will. All right, this is the first big lesson in Daniel. God hates sin. We cannot persist in disobedience to God's laws and expect the inevitable judgment. It's going to happen. So if you're disobedient, if you don't follow His laws, His commands, His principles, then there's a consequence. And they're not good. All right, Jeremiah 25:9 says, my servant, God calls Nebuchadnezzar His servant. The fact of God's sovereign control over kings and nations. The hand of God is in the rise and the fall of nations. He removeth kings. He setteth up kings. So we dare not forget that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men and giveth it to whomever He will, and setteth up over it the basis to men. So one of the things we may learn from the book of Daniel, a philosophy of history, is namely that God is sovereign over the destinies of men. What we see happening in the world today, the leaders that are in place, the actions that these leaders are taking, He's got His hands in it. He's moving everything to where He wants it to end up. Now we may not, well, what is He doing? What is He thinking? Well, His ways are not our ways, are they? His ways are higher than our ways. So He knows exactly what He's going with this whole program to bring about exactly what He expects. But He's patient. He's hanging on. He's saying, I'm not done yet. I want some more to come to know me. I want some more. But I need some people to help me out. He's still saying that. Alright, so we see that God is using Nebuchadnezzar to bring about judgment on His people. Under the sovereign rule of God, the most powerful and proudest rulers must come to naught. Nebuchadnezzar was going to find that out big time. But he was an instrument of God. He was used by God to bring about judgment on His people. It says in 2 Chronicles 36:5, Jehoiakim did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord his God. That started, all of these kings that are just doing this, I'm king. I can do whatever I want to. I can set up things any way I want to. We got kings going around right now going, I can do whatever I want to. But if it's sinful, if this goes against God's mandates and His Word, there is going to be a consequence to it. So the purpose of the book of Daniel is to show how God, by His providence and power, controls and directs men and nations. We have to, as we face the times which we're going to face in the coming years, we have to be focused on that fact that God is the sovereign ruler of heaven and earth. He is the possessor. He's got dominion over all of it. As we face those times where we get fearful and anxious, we know the story, and we know how it ends, and we know who wins. And I think Daniel, at the age of 14, 15, as a young man, got it. He understood it.